So in this video, I just want to give you guys a better idea of what kind of condition this engine's actually in and what I've done with it so far in terms of, rebuilding it, re-ringing it, and the bearings and everything. So what it is if you're kind of newer to the channel, it's a 302 and it's out of a 1987 Ford F-150. And when I got it, it had a two-barrel, cast iron two-barrel intake manifold with a two-barrel carburetor that somebody had swapped onto there at some point or another. And I put this engine on the dyno. This is the first engine I put on the dyno, and I basically just needed an engine to test the dyno out and see whether it was going to work or not. And while it was like maybe the second video I did, I had this engine on there, and I'll show you some of that, how badly it smoked when I put a load on it when I first ran it. Yeah, it was in pretty rough condition in terms of piston rings and pistons and the crosshatch and the cylinder bores. So in order to correct the oil burning problem, my decision was to take the engine apart, hone the cylinders with a ball hone, and put new rings in it. And there were a lot of things wrong with the pistons in terms of the piston to bore clearance and the clearance between the side ring clearance, the clearance between the ring and the ring groove in the piston. And I'm going to show you a diagram about roughly what I saw wrong with that and why I think that could be a problem. But what I want to do in this video is just give you a better idea about the condition of the engine. I've got a build sheet with all the dimensions that I took when I put it together. And what I want to do is I want to warm the engine up, I want to do a compression test on it, and then I want to do a leak down test on it, and then we can go over the results of that. And another thing I might do in this video is I got a new oil filter for it, and I want to maybe cut this old oil filter open and see if there's any see what's going on inside of there, if there's anything there I ought to be concerned about. All right, so anyway, let me get the engine warmed up and we can start doing the compression test on it. Okay, so I just got done warming the engine up, and I got all the spark plugs pulled out. And I thought, well, if we're going to be doing a kind of a, if we're going to be looking this engine over, I thought maybe we ought to take a look at the spark plugs, and I did see a couple of things that were kind of interesting. Now, they're on here numbered 1 through 8, and what I'm kind of seeing on a couple of cylinders is, well, it looks like that plug is in the process of getting oil fouled, because that's not gasoline, that's oil on there. So, well, there's one thing, and then the other thing, I'm going to show you each one of them so you can see the color of the plug too. But that doesn't, it's just, that's just idle and basically idle fuel ratios. So number 2 looks a lot better, doesn't have that oil on it. But number 3, on the other hand, that does look like it's beginning to oil foul. 4 looks pretty nice. So this is number 5, also looks pretty good. A little darker, but still no oil on that one. Not too bad. And then here's number 8. So it looks like it's cylinders 1 and 3 that have oil on them. So I'll keep a note of that. But now let's get over to the engine and get the compression tester hooked up to it, and we'll start compression testing the engine. Alright, so we're ready to do the first compression test, and I just kind of wanted to show you how warm the engine is. And we're at about 175 degrees on that. So the way I'm going to do this is this and the leak down test is I'm just going to do cylinder number 1 on camera, because I don't want to bore you going through all 8 of them. But then after I got it all done, we'll sit down and look at the results. So let's do this first one here. 140. Looks like about 140. That's below spec. So this ought to be kind of interesting. That's a lot lower than it was when I first put the engine together. Quite a bit, like, yeah, quite a bit. We'll have a look at it though. Okay, so we got the leak down tester connected to number 1. I'm setting it at the, use it at the 75 PSI setting. And it looks like I'm reading somewhere around, what is that, 66? And on the chart, that means that's a 12% leak down. The kit says a difference of 10 to 15 PSI indicates the need for further investigation. So we're at 75 and 66, so we're like right on. I took the breather out right here and I put my ear, you know, I listen in that neighborhood and you can definitely hear it going into the crankcase. So it looks like we got some, it's not like terrible, but it's not great either. So, and that kind of correlates with the low compression pressure, because that read like 140 something, and the spec in the book on that is 150, so it's below specification on number 1. So let's let me go through and do the rest of them. Like I said, I'm not going to bore you with that, but we will when we're done we'll go in, we'll review all these numbers. Okay, so we'll do that then. Okay, so I just made a real rough sketch of basically a cross section of a piston. That's like the piston pin there, and the top ring groove, second ring groove, and third ring groove, and that's meant to represent a cross section of the piston ring. So with the not ideal compression pressures that we saw and the not ideal leak down percentages that we saw, I want to talk a little bit about why I think that's happening. At least 2 reasons that I can think of that are kind of at least contributing to it. So when I put this engine together, I made sure to measure the clearance between the ring and this part of the groove, and they were, I can't remember what they were. We'll see that later. We'll see that in the final results. But I recorded that for all the cylinders, and on all of them they were out. And so what I'll say is that what I think that clearance should be there is somewhere around 2/1000ths of an inch. And I'll try to remember offhand, but I think they range somewhere between like 6 and 10/1000ths clearance here. And not only was the clearance too much here, but I'll show you something else that I kind of noticed in it. And then I'll have to redraw this a little bit. So basically what I detected there was that probably the bottom of the ring groove wasn't flat like that, you know, like it was before. It was kind of tapered like that, and then the way I detected that was with the new piston rings installed in it. The new piston rings in, I would use the feeler gauge, and I noticed that with a certain thickness feeler gauge, I couldn't get that to go up against the inside of the groove. It would only go about to there, say. But with a thin feeler gauge, it would go all the way there, which told me that this surface here is tapered. And if you've got a taper there, kind of what it's going to do is your ring's not going to fit in the groove like it should anymore, and that probably the end of the ring is kind of, let's say that's the cylinder wall there. Because that's tapered there, that ring no longer rides along that surface kind of parallel on that end there. it's no longer really perpendicular to that cylinder surface. So I think that's a problem. Another thing that can happen, I think that can happen when you have too much clearance here, is that gases might be able to sneak around like that, you know what I mean? So that's another way I think problems could be happening here. And when it comes to these dimensions here, they were all good on the second and third ring. They were good in there. They were like 3,000s, 3,000s, which I consider to be pretty good. But yeah, these ones on the top were all worn out, and anyway, they were all in pretty bad condition, and I think that's probably a good chance of where some of my problems are turning up. And another thing that I noticed with these on all the cylinders was that, or well, most of the cylinders, was that the piston to bore clearance was excessive, which kind of tells me that the cylinder wall, probably more the cylinder wall than the piston, had been worn over time and made that piston to bore clearance. So what can happen with when you got a piston to bore clearance problem is that the piston can kind of rock in the bore, so that it could let's just say let's say the pistons rock this way, you know, and so it kind of be like, well, how would I put it? It wouldn't be sitting. It could rock like that in the bore, and if the piston's rocking around in there, that could potentially, I would say, that could potentially cause some blow-by problems. And then, but the other thing that when you have, the other thing that can happen when you have too much piston to bore clearance and the piston can rock around inside of the bore is you get a noise, and that noise is called piston slap. And I don't know where it happens in the bore. I'm going to guess it happens somewhere around TDC maybe. I don't know when it happens. But at any rate, what happens is the piston can rock around in the bore, and at some point the piston slaps the cylinder wall and makes a knocking sound. And what I'll say is with this engine here, when it's cold, and other times, I hear what I think is piston slap. These are the things that I think are causing this engine to have blow-by. The only good way to fix this problem and make the engine right would be to have it be bored. And I've said this in at least two other videos. That I said because I knew all this stuff was happening all along, and I said before that, yeah, what I did with this was I ball honed it and I threw new rings in it. But I also said that it really needed to be bored 30 and have new pistons put in it. But because with this engine, everything that I've been doing with this engine is kind of an experiment. And it's kind of like, we all know what things should be when you build an engine, but what happens if you don't do it the right way? And you know, what are the consequences of doing it the wrong way? How bad does it have to be before it really becomes a problem? And in that sense, what can you kind of get away with? So what I found out with here is that the piston to bore clearance is bad. Really, to make this engine right, it needs to be 30 over with new pistons. And then the other thing I'll say is that I didn't really make a point of showing it in the videos, but when I'm standing at the console running the engine with a load on it, I can see the oil fill cap, and there's a spout there for the PVC connection. And when it's running with a load on it, there's a pretty steady stream of blow-by coming out of it. So before we go inside and look at all the build sheet numbers that I got when I assembled this engine a couple of years ago, maybe it's going on 3 years ago. But before I do that, the one last thing I want to do out here in the garage is I want to pull that oil filter off. And I've got a tool to cut that open, as I want to look inside of there and see if there's anything kind of, if I'm seeing any metal particles or anything like that in there, and that'll kind of tell me a little bit more about, you know, the rest of the engine. But I'm not that worried about that stuff. I think the biggest problem this engine got is the pistons and the condition of the cylinder walls. But anyway, let's look at that oil filter next. Alright, so let's have a quick look inside this oil filter. I do see I see sparkly things in there. Not great big chunks of anything, but I do see little flakes. Not sure nothing I'm terribly concerned about. Well, I mean, there is dirt and debris in there, but there aren't any large metal chunks of anything, so those little sparkly bits in there, I don't know if that's something I ought to be concerned about or not. Let me let's go over to the bench and have a look at the pleats on that filter. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. To me, that kind of looks more like dirt than metal parts. But yeah. Yeah, it's kind of dirty. Definitely dirty. So, filter definitely dirty, but I'm not seeing pieces that are really kind of indicating like bearing problems. But definitely dirty. It's definitely time to do this. And there are things in there. Doesn't look metallic though. It looks kind of like, looks like sludge or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting. But at any rate, it's dirty, but it doesn't have metal chunks in it. So my guess is that my bearings are probably okay. So anyway, worth looking at. Okay, so what do we got next? So something else I wanted to just check real quick is I let the engine cool down. Oh, it's about 109, 110 degrees. And I wanted to see if as the engine cooled down, maybe the compression pressure would come up. So let's have a quick look at that. And it came up just a little bit, but only like maybe 5 psi, not much at all. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to take in I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 pumps worth of oil in there. And then do a compression test on it again. Because if it jumps up significantly, then it'll kind of lend itself to the idea that we do have, you know, the rings are kind of an issue. So let's give that a shot. Okay, Anyway, so yeah, giving it some oil, put it up to about 165. So it went up about 20 psi with some oil in there. Let me run that over. Kind of get the oil kind of moved around in there and see what it does again. Yeah, and that one's up. That one's up like 170. So, yeah, you probably got some. Probably got some cylinder wall sealing going on there. Some piston ring problems. Something else I've been seeing is kind of some oil turning up there, but I can't remember if that's that might have just been from when I had the valve covers off and they were upside down. Maybe some oil pooled up in there, but I kind of remember cleaning that off. That should have been cleared up by now. And then over here you kind of see that oil there. I had that wiped down. I had this all white, and it's coming out of there. So, but I can't remember, I'm not 100% sure if that's coming out of there because of blow-by or if that's coming out of there because when I had the valve covers off a while ago, I might have just, you know, being upside down, maybe some oil pooled up in that. But it's been a few days, it's been like quite a while since I put those valve covers back on, and you'd think that that would have drained, if there was oil in there, it would have drained out by now, but I'm kind of suspicious that, a little suspicious that that oil is coming out of there because of blow-by. Kind of coming out and condensing on stuff. So I'm not 100% sure about that, but it's not, it's a possibility that that's the result of blow-by. This is the build sheet that I have for the 302, and looks like I put that engine together, or rebuilt that engine back in July of 2022. So here's the torque specs that I used for the cylinder heads, the main caps, and the rods. And here's the type of fastener I used for that. And one thing I'll say about this is that I did put ARP main studs and ARP rod bolts in it. And an experiment that I'm kind of doing with this is something I want to see is that because I didn't have the block align honed, and I didn't have the rods reconditioned, so it's kind of something I want to see what happens if by putting these upgraded fasteners in place. What does that do to the bearings, and does that have a real problem in there? But real quickly, I'll show you one of the reason why I'm thinking that I might be able to get away with that kind of a fastener without doing those procedures on this particular engine. I'm not saying you can do this with any engine, but on this particular engine, I think one of the reasons I'm trying to get away with it is because I've got so much, I've got above, you know, like a typical, you know, rod main bearing clearance should be somewhere around 2 to 3 thousandths, but I'm out of spec on that. I've got more clearance there than I should, and I'm thinking that maybe because of that excessive clearance there, or that extra clearance there, that I can maybe possibly get away with running these aftermarket fasteners, these stronger aftermarket fasteners, without having the machine work done. And the same thing, the same reason with the main cap fasteners is that because I've got quite a lot of clearance there, that maybe the distortion that's going to be caused by those stronger fasteners might not be bad enough to cause a clearance problem. So, but if in the future I take the engine apart, then we can have a look at those bearings and see how they've fared through having this done, through having those fasteners in there without having the rods reconditioned or the block align honed. But for right now, my opinion is don't try to do that. It's probably not a good idea. And the manufacturers of the fasteners, I'm like 99% sure will say, if you put these in, then you have to have the machine work done to go along with it. But that's a whole nother story. So let's just move on with this blow-by issue and the problems that I know that exist with the pistons and the cylinder bores. And so here's the cylinder bore numbers that I recorded back then, and here's the piston diameters that I recorded, and the clearances that go with that. And these are all quite, these are, especially some of these here, like this, you know, almost 6,000 piston to bore clearance. Now that on a cast piston, that's pretty excessive. So the kind of piston to bore clearance that I would kind of want to see is somewhere maybe with a cast piston, like especially like a modern hyper-eutectic cast piston. I would probably be looking for something like 2,000s there, maybe a little bit more, but right around 2,000s would be a good piston to bore clearance. And what that indicates there to me is this bore has grown in diameter from wear, and the piston has decreased in diameter from wear, more than likely. And these dimensions here, it seems to me like once you get above like 4,000s, maybe a little bit more than 4,000s, that's kind of where I think you kind of start running into piston slap noise problems, especially when the engine's cold. Because as the engine warms up and the piston warms up, the diameter of the piston is going to grow, and then this number here will shrink. So, but I don't know, that's one thing that I know that's wrong with this engine, and really the only way I know of to fix that problem is to have the cylinder, have the engine block bored 30 and have new piston and put new pistons in it, and then get that in where it ought to be. So there's one major problem that I have with this engine that I don't like, and I've shown you these are just the rod bearing clearances, which are kind of, like I said, they're a couple thousandths out of, they're 1 to 2,000ths larger than they ought to be. And I don't know, I'm kind of thinking that maybe I might be able to get away with that, just with some, with some higher viscosity oil, some heavier oil, and the same thing with the main bearings. But, maybe I can get away with it. I haven't seen anything so far to tell me that I can't yet. Well, at any rate, basically the clearances on the oil clearances on the rod and the mains are out of specification, but I don't they're not ridiculously far out of specification. And and again, everything with this engine is an experiment for me, and the idea is run it out of spec and see what happens, and just try things and see what happens. And the only way I'm going to find out if any of this stuff is still okay is if I take that engine back apart and start looking at these things. So, well, anyway, that's one part of the story there. And then here's the ring gaps that I measured, and those are all quite, that's a lot of ring gap there. And I did not file fit these to that size. They're large like that because the cylinder wall is worn out, a few thousandths, and that makes the larger the bore is, the larger the gap will be on your ring, and that's why they're like that. I didn't set them to that size. That's just how it turned out. So those are the ring gaps, and there's a possibility that some blow-by could be caused by extra ring gap. So anyway, I just wanted to show you those numbers there, and here are the ring side clearances, the clearances between the ring and the ring groove, and like that one there is 10,000ths. That's quite a bit, and they're all out of specification on here. The side clearances on the second ring actually looked kind of okay. They're not that far out. But these ones here I think are causing some of my problems, especially considering that I think that the ring, the groove in the piston is no longer really kind of square anymore. I think it's kind of tapered like I showed in that diagram. And I think that can cause a lot of problems in terms of blow-by and the ring's ability to seal the cylinder. So anyway, but my opinion on the ring side clearance is that it should be somewhere around 2000s. So these are all out, you know, 2-3 times what they ought to be. And that one probably like 5 times what it ought to be. So, and probably the reason the top ring groove got worn faster than the second ring groove is because the top ring, I think I've heard the top ring deals with like 90% of the cylinder sealing, so it deals with more force on that ring land. So anyway, that's why I think that's happening. So between the excessive piston to bore clearance and these issues here with the ring side clearance, I think that's where a lot of my blow-by problems are coming from, my ring control problems. And really, like again, I'm going to say it one more time, is that the only way I can fix that is to have the engine bored, and I'll have to make a decision about that as I go forward. And then down here, so these are the compression test numbers that I took before I rebuilt the engine. So this was just what it was, stock, high mileage stock, and that's, like I said, that's before I rebuilt it or re-ringed it. And then these are the numbers after I ball honed the cylinders and put new rings in it, and it picked up compression everywhere. But and at the time I didn't have a leak down tester, so I don't have these numbers here, I'm afraid. But I did get one, and but look at kind of where we're at now, and wow, those are, to me that's. Let's have a look at, these are the numbers that we took the other day, and it does appear that things have kind of deteriorated rather significantly in terms of the cylinder sealing there. So, and what are we talking about? Maybe I haven't really put that much runtime on that engine, so yeah. And then here are these are the leak down tests, and a couple of them weren't that bad, but these 15s and 18s, that's kind of getting up there. So yeah, this engine needs to be bored, and it needs new pistons. So, and I'll have to make a decision about whether or not I want to put that kind of money into this engine. And it's just a decision I'll have to think about. It, and make that decision going forward, or if I want to pull this engine and just move on to something else. But kind of my takeaway from this at the moment is that when it comes to doing a ball hone and a re-ring job on a high mileage engine, well, in this particular situation, I would say it wasn't worth it. But I guess it would kind of. But on the other hand, the engine doesn't really run that badly. It just has some blow-by. So maybe it would be okay in somebody's, like in a daily driver type of thing, or like just something that you drive on occasion. Maybe this would be okay for a while. Maybe it'd be okay for years. I don't really know, but the way things have kind of deteriorated here, it kind of seems to me like maybe not such a good idea. At least for me in this particular situation, it probably wasn't worth doing, but what it did tell me was, what it kind of told me was, it did fix the oil burning problem. That problem went away, and it's still gone, as far as I know. So yeah, I mean, ball honing the cylinders and replacing their rings did fix that oil burning problem. So it did do that, but it seems like in terms of cylinder ring seal, it was okay for a while, but it seems like it's deteriorating rather quickly. So I guess that's about all I got for this week, and I have some thinking to do about whether I want to have that engine block machined and go forward with that. But at any rate, that's all I got for this week, and we'll see you next time.